Shalom Talmudim. I know you are in shock that I am doing this video the day after class again, but I have determined in my heart, at least for this week as well, to try to make life as easy as possible for you. So anyways, we'll do our best. And even if that means I still haven't graded your videos yet, but that's okay. All right, so we will get to that. I was confronted by a student who shall remain nameless is what I was trying to say, and saying that I've gotten lazy by not typing out the answers on my homework. So here are the answers for homework 10, and I'm going to upload this file as homework 10 with the answers so you can double check what you've done, and you can see that there. And then I've also put the verb parsing for you to double check as well, because something like this could easily wind up on the exam. So that's what you want to be aware of as we are trying to learn. So I'll put that on Populi. Just as a reminder, you really need to know this. There's no way to get around it. You need to know the paradigm, just the normal paradigm. I would encourage you can learn any paradigm, but I would just encourage you to learn the Shamar paradigm because it's just very basic and you see it a lot. And in knowing that, then you can recognize the endings, and you can recognize when a verb is perfect based on the endings versus imperfect based on the prefixes. So remember, those are the keys to telling a verb, is prefixes and suffixes. The imperfects are identified by their prefixes. The yat rule is often thrown out there by some students, and so you can start to recognize, and this is key because in every stem, it follows the same endings. The only thing that changes is the vowel pattern underneath the word itself. Plus, there are special prefixes for different paradigms. So that's something to keep in mind. So we talked in class about the perfect, and the key for the perfect for kal, nifal, piel, pual, hifpil, hifil, and hofal is what it sounds like. So nifal in the perfect is always going to have a n or a noon prefix at the beginning. Okay? And then a hifil is always going to have a hi or a hey at the beginning. Now we did have in our homework, just by review, for the parsing, words like this, where we have the, wrong button there, where we have this word, and you can tell that it doesn't have a hi, it has a he at the beginning. But the reason for that is because of the ayin at the beginning. Now, just an interesting similarity. One of the things that in one of the videos with Aleph and Beth that we learned is that ma becomes meh when it's in front of asa. And the reason is because, so instead of saying ma asiti, what have I done, or what did I do, she says me asiti, because the vowel previous to the ayin undergoes change, because gutturals wreck the vowel patterns. That's something you need to understand. So gutturals are what we call difficult verbs. Anytime there's a guttural, it changes the normal pattern. If it was just a normal pattern, Hebrew would be the easiest language in the world, no joke. But with gutturals coming in, you have slight variations. Now, at the same time, though, this isn't, once you get the hang of it, it's not actually that difficult. It just seems like it right now. But in reality, this can't be a hofal, because a hofal needs a longer consonant. Plus, the other thing, I'm just going to go ahead and tell you this, is that hofals are super rare. They're actually not that common. So statistically speaking, if you see a hey prefix, if you guess hifil, especially on like a quiz or exam, it's going to be like 98% of the time, if not higher, that you're going to get it right. So the hey prefix is normally a dead giveaway of the hifil. So be aware of that. And then, I don't want to ruin your life of investigation, but this is something similar going on here, right? Because avad, you know the word avad, to serve, but is it a nifal if you have a segol? Well, part of the problem here is that this is another ayin word. So you have the corruption of the vowel from a normal ne aved or whatever to ne evad. So it's still a nifal, but the same kind of vowel changes are going on. So normally, what something sounds like is going to tell you what it is in the perfect stem, right? So, or I should say, in the perfect for what stem it is. So now I want to introduce to you a new concept for the color pattern. And I should say that the sound alike works for both perfect and vocatals. So vocatals and perfect. But if the verb is a imperfect or a vayiktol, the way that you determine what stem it is, what nuance, is through recognizing color patterns. So I have a handy dandy chart here to give you this system. Now, some people love this system and some people don't, because again, there are certain exceptions, but once you know what you're looking for with regard to exceptions, you can recognize it. So for example, gutturals may mess up the color system a little bit, but as long as you know, oh, hey, there's a guttural here, that must mean something happened, well, then you're okay. Also, weak verbs. Weak verbs are those that have the letters hey, yod. We'll write those here. So hey, yod, vav, nun. These are weak. So if you see a verb that has one of those letters in it, it may drop out, and that's going to change some things. So we'll talk about that, but don't worry too much about that. Just learn the regular pattern first. And here we have the system for imperfect verbs. So the Christmas pattern, green, red, green, is nifal. Purple, red, green is pl. Purple, orange, red, pual, less common. The hitpael, you can recognize the color pattern, but really the standard that I just say is if it sounds like a hitpael, it's a hitpael. And so that's the easiest one in the world to recognize because it always has a 2-letter prefix. And so you can just hear it sound it out every time. It always sounds like a hitpael. The hifil has red, purple, green. That's a really strong standard pattern to acknowledge. And what I mean by when I'm saying the color pattern, by the way, is at the very beginning, I handed out this chart with regard to colors. And the way that the system has been implemented is just to associate vowel patterns by colors, but you won't even need to associate by colors if you didn't want to. It's just easier for students to memorize colors than vowel letters usually. But red refers to A-class vowels. Green refers to I or E-class vowels, which relate obviously in vowel systems, and then orange is the O or U class vowel systems, and those are recognized there. So that's what we mean by those colors. So if we wanted to say it a different way, instead of saying green, red, green, we could say that a nifal verb pattern in the imperfect or in the vayiktol or in the jussive is going to follow a I class vowel, and then a class vowel, and then an I or an E class vowel. That's going to be the typical pattern. Now, the question would be, what if you have a word that ends with a guttural? Then the last letter or the last vowel isn't going to be green. It's not going to be I or E, but it's going to be an A class to match with that guttural. But that's an exception. So I just want you to know that there are reasons behind the exceptions, which we'll learn. But learn the patterns, and then you'll be able to recognize. So the reason this is important, you basically go through the system. If you see an imperfect verb, that is a verb that does not have a suffix that's showing it to be a perfect, then you can go through this system. So I'm going to bring us up here. Some of you were working through this earlier. So in the class last night, we were working through this. And so as you're reading along, you're actually given 3 imperfect verbs. These are actually 3 imperfect verbs. And what's most interesting is that these are not call verbs. These are not call verbs. There's actually something else going on here, a different nuance. Now you may have just recognized this is, and some, by the way, your translation usually will work out without recognizing the nuance, but the nuance is actually important for exegetical value and understanding what is actually being said by the verse. So for example, when we get to this, in all which I said to you, or all which I have said to you, something like that. We can talk more about that. This is tishameru. Now, if you say, okay, it's imperfect, I know that because it has a tav prefix and it has a suffix marking plural. So this is a 2MP. This is a second person masculine plural verb. But what's the stem? Well, because of the color system, you can say, okay, green is IE, red is A class, and green is IE class. So it's green, red, green, or I, A, I, or E. So that is, if we go back to our chart, that's the nifal pattern. So nifal is typically a passive, or in some senses a reflexive idea in some instances. And so what it's saying is like, be on your guard in accordance with all that I have said to you. So, and depending on how English translations have translated that, that's it is what it is. But it's saying like, be very careful, like make sure you are being guarded by everything that I've taught you. It's that kind of idea. Now, on the other hand, we approach this verb, and you go through the color system because, again, you have the tav prefix and a u suffix, shurik suffix, which is 2MP. And so we run through the color pattern here. You have red, which is A class, and then you have purple, which is the shava. And I don't know if I mentioned that before, but the purple is the shava. And so red, purple, and then hirik yod is green. So red, purple, green. What is red, purple, green? Here we go. It's a hifil. So that's causative. That's a causative. So zakar is to remember. So what does it mean to cause somebody to remember? And this is where, if you think about the English, they might say something like mention. You mention something. Well, what they're trying to get at is when you cause something to be remembered, you're talking about it or you're mentioning it. So it says here, the name of other gods you shall not cause to be remembered. Or in other words, you shall not bring them up. You shall not mention them. You shall not bring them into remembrance is the idea. So that's what's being targeted there with that idea. And notice how with lo, we talked about the difference between lo and al. And with lo, it's an absolute prohibition, like in every circumstance. This is what needs to be the case. And then in the last verb here, you have kind of an odd little switch to a singular verb here. So it's not not talking to the plural Israelites anymore. It's actually another nifal, and it's a imperfect verb. And we have a green, red, red. So we don't have a green, red, green. But remember what I said about the ending of gutturals. Gutturals love messing up the vowels, and specifically gutturals at the end throw A-class vowels in to the mix. So it would be green, red, green, except on words that end in gutturals. Then it's green, red, red. Now, if you're wondering how in the world can I double check these things, well, here's with this ending of the chart, there's some takeaways. So notice for nifals, they're going to have what's known as a nifal triangle in the imperfect. And what I mean by the nifal triangle, let's see if I can bring this up here. So the nifal triangle has a hirik. Oops, don't want that. I want red. Yes, okay. So the nifal triangle is going to have a hirik underneath, and then a dagesh in the letter, and then a kametz under. That's what they call the nifal triangle. So the dagesh in the first root letter, the hirik, and the kametz. If you look at the other nifal as well, it's called the nifal triangle. You're always, that's a common pattern that you're going to find out. It's the only place it's not going to show up is if the word begins with a guttural, because a guttural rejects the dagesh. So that's a confirmation that we are dealing with the nifal triangle. That's another handy way of looking at that. So you can familiarize yourselves with these other tells of what's going on, but that is going to help you understand the nuance of what you're translating and what you're working through as you go through it. By the way, if you're looking at, like, let's say Vayomer here, and you try to run through the color system, and you say, okay, I see that it's a Vayiktol because of the Vi, so that means the color system is in play. It's not perfect. Or a Vukatal, so the color system's in play. So the way that you do it through a Vayiktol is you ignore the Vav, and then you start after that. So you count the colors. There's only two. It's orange and green. So if you go back to your chart, is there ever a orange green? No, there's no orange green in the color pattern. And so the rule is that if any of these patterns do not match the verb, then you just treat it as a call. So in this case, this would just be a normal, which we already know anyway because we've been using it already, but it's just a normal call. No special causative nuance, passive nuance, or anything like that. It's just normal. So that's kind of how you work through the system. You try to determine the verb, whether it's perfect or Vukatal, and if it is, you go by sound. If it's Vayiktol or it is imperfect, then you go ahead and work through the color system to figure out the nuance. And that should get you started in figuring out some of these verbs that we run across in these instances. By the way, this verb right here, I'll go ahead and tell you that the mem on the front of it is an indication of what it is. So if you're trying to figure out what is this, well, the mem on the front is the indicator. So you should be able to figure it out that way, because there's certain verbs that take a mem on the front in other stems. And so you can figure that out, as it were. All right, well, we're into the weeds now, but I think it'll be fun because we're actually going to be working through things. And if you're feeling overwhelmed, don't worry, you're not alone. And it's okay because honestly, we are armed to be able to translate everything now. We just need to get used to it. There are a few exceptions, like I even mentioned today with the gutturals. But really, it's just learning vocab and just practicing from this point on. So you just got to keep hammering it, keep working hard at it, because you're really close to being able to just read Hebrew, and you're already doing it. So that should be encouraging, and Lord willing, we'll keep that up.